right, welcome everyone. Looks like we've got people streaming in here, so we'll give everyone a second to kind of get situated. Okay, we've got a good number of people. We've got a lot to cover today, so I think we'll go ahead and kick things off and get started. First of all, my name is Brian. I'm one of the technical folks over on the Pro Shop team. Justin Quinn is also with us. I'm coming from my home office here in Bellingham, Washington. Justin is joining us from the Denver area. And we're gonna talk today about some of the lessons that Justin has learned working with Focus on Machine and working with ProShop. Just a couple of sort of quick housekeeping items. If you all want to throw in the chat, where you're from, kind of give us an idea who we're talking to and kind of what areas, what regions you're from, that would be great. For questions, we do ask that you use the questions and answer function. In Zoom, you might not see that as an option right there. Oh, great, we've got some people from Montana, California, looks like Michigan, New York, Indiana, Iowa, Quebec. Awesome. All right, welcome everyone. So yeah, if you can't find the Q&A, it's probably under the more option in the Zoom meeting. So that would be where we'd like to see questions come in. We'll be able to monitor those. In general, we're going to try to keep questions until the end so we can loop back to some certain topics. So if you post a question and we don't get to it right away, yeah, by all means, we're going to come back to those things. All right. More people coming in. Ohio, Pennsylvania, Australia, nice. Somewhere from California, Illinois. All right. Okay, so yeah, let's go ahead and get started here. So again, I'm Brian Anderson, one of the product solutions engineers here at ProShop. I've been working with the software for 25 years now, and I help people sort of see how ProShop can help them solve their challenges. Justin, I'll go ahead and let you introduce yourself as well.
Yeah, I'm Justin Quinn, president focused on machining just outside of Denver. Been using ProShop since 2020, and really enjoyed it and have evolved with it since we first implemented and really are, I feel like, hitting our full stride as a shop as of the past 9 months or so, just as we've continued to develop and get deeper into the system.
Yeah, it's an evolution for sure. Absolutely. As is, many things in this industry. Yeah, so real quick before we dive in, I do want to talk a little bit about our sort of first regional event here in Anaheim, California. This event is going to be hosted by us, obviously. Paul Van Meter, one of the founders, co-founders of ProShop, will be sort of driving everything. We've got Marvin Rodriguez from True Precision Machining and John Zmuda from Mosey's that'll be joining him. It's going to be an in-person event, so it's going to be a lot of fun. That is April 15th. And if you're interested in joining, spaces are limited, but go ahead and reach out to us and we can see if that's something that we can make work. But we're really excited about it. We're expecting kind of a lot of good stuff here moving forward. All right. Today, what are we here for? So today we're really kind of talking about you know 5 hard-won lessons from the front lines of manufacturing. That's the title. So what does that mean? Well, of course, there's many lessons to learn. You can't just boil it down to only 5. There's just so many to talk about. But for the sake of time, and we don't have unlimited time, we did actually say, okay, let's pick some really heavy hitters here. So we're going to talk a little bit about quoting and why you want to focus on that. The idea that it pays to sweat the details. What does that mean when you need to sweat the details, and what benefit do you get from that? Things to watch out for, like bottlenecks that can really affect your throughput. On-time delivery as a reputation. We really want to know that the things that we do every day that lead to good and solid performance in our company is our reputation, and how do we do that? And then, of course, what's the continuous customer experience? What workflow improvements do we make to the things that we do every day? How does that filter down and flow down to what customers experience? Because ultimately, customers will continue to use you and buy if everything works well for them, or at least the vast majority of things. And then, like I said, we're going to open it up and do some Q&A toward the end. Um, First things first, Justin, let's dive into quoting. The other day when we were kind of talking about this, we had bullet pointed a few specific items. And really, let's dive into the first thing here. Don't rely on vague estimates. You want to build a quote that's accurate with transparent lead times. You want to kind of dive into that topic a little bit and tell us a little bit about your experience there?
Yeah, so this is one of the areas we've really evolved as of the past, couple years. Early on we would dial really in on the numbers and cost and pricing and get that dialed in. But when it came to lead time, it was really kind of like I don't know. We always had our standard lead time that we would quote, um, which, as all shop owners and managers know, lead time is a constant moving target inside a shop. We've gone from being extremely slow to where we could literally start making a part in the next day or two to times where it's like I can't even touch anything inside of 8, 10 weeks. And so, lead time really needs to be a function of accuracies, and we handle that through our quoting process to where we have lead times in for ordering material. We have a lead time kind of built into our order processing stage of the quote. Of course, machining, that's always the easy one to dial in because that's what's basically building the quote. But then outside processing, you need to factor in those shipping days. How long does it, if it's just right down the road, you might just put in a day for shipping because, you got to get it up there, whether it's your own delivery driver, you might UPS it. But when they receive it, they're not processing that order, like they're not waiting for you to send that part to them so they can process the order,
Right,
right? Like
right.
I know
Yeah,
we
yeah,
want to think that's what happens, but there's a day or two slack there, even if it's 20 minutes up the road kind of thing. And of
yeah.
course, if you got to ship out of state, UPS, I mean, they're actually pretty accurate on their times. If it's 2 days, 3 days, factor that in because one of the things we found, we started going to California for some of our plating a couple years ago with aerospace demands. And, it's 3 days. So we would always put 3 days shipping. Well, it's 3 days there and it's 3 days back. And it's a
Mhm.
day on either end to process. So what we found is anytime we go to California, it's really like a week and a half extra
Mhm.
just in transport.
Yeah,
Um, and so
yeah.
those things really kick your butt on lead times if you don't get them just right.
Yeah, and I think we can dissect this a little bit further. I mean, you had mentioned you can figure out what your machining timeline is like, and most companies will start there, and that's a great place to start. You kind of know what your lead times are internally because that's what you can control. But as you say, there's so many other factors. It could be shipping or outside processing lead times. It could be holidays. If you're shipping internationally, you might have international holidays that you need to think about, and
Weather,
even customs times. So
yeah,
building all of those things into the quote takes some practice, of course, but that's all going to lead to better visibility for the customer to understand when they choose you what they're actually going to get.
yeah,
Uh, and when we say, hey, this is survival, the lowest price and or the fastest delivery often wins the quote. But the problem is that's short-term thinking. If you can't hold to those timelines that you've quoted, and then you win the job, and then you don't meet that date, what happens is that customer loses faith in you over time, and you
yeah.
won't continue to get more work. So it might be a good immediate plan because you're the winning bid, but again, you're trying to build a long-term relationship with your customer to support them as as a client. You're helping them do what they do by
Yeah.
doing what you do the best you can.
And
Um,
that long-term approach is exactly what I was going to chime in with. And it's really paid dividends to us here locally in the past 12 months. You know, as we were setting up with some new aerospace customers a couple years ago, we really only won on price because we didn't have a reputation to fall back on. So the only way we were getting work was on price.
Mhm.
And so that was kind of a brutal entry into the market. But since we've kind of got our foot in the market and we've gained a little bit of trust, I would say lead time is our go-to. And now we are in a position to where we get to dictate price a little bit more than we used to. And our customers, our buyers are now sending us parts knowing that we will deliver when we say we will, and it might cost them 10% extra, but they would have spent that in other headaches dealing with a shop that they didn't have a good relationship with. So it
Mhm.
does come full circle, and this is where the evolve thing kind of comes in, is like you've got to continue making your system better. That way, when you send a quote to your customer, you can guarantee them this part will be on your dock by this date or sooner. And internally, I know we're going to make a profit at those prices. Once you get to that point, you can really be a powerful shop that really can kind of demand more from your customers versus just being a price taker.
Right. Yeah. No, I think that's a great comment there, and it's been in my experience as well, similar. Over the course of time, as you're building these long-term relationships, it's entirely likely that you will win work that you previously lost to a competitor. Again, because you're building your reputation, you're saying, "Hey, this is what I can do," and you're sticking to it. It really speaks loudly to that long-term approach for winning clients and winning work. Part of the relationship aspect here also means building solid relationships with your vendors.
Absolutely.
Understanding that you can push them when you need to, but you really want to rely on their standard process and that it's consistent over time. That's a relationship, and some vendors will fall out of favor and some will come into favor over time. It's cyclical, so you've got to continue to evaluate that with whatever tools you can, evaluating previous runs, year to year, month to month, quarter to quarter. All of those kinds of things are important to be evaluating. A supplier report card, if you will, which there's multiple ways of doing that. Obviously, the way that we do that with ProShop, but it's really critical to build that relationship and be able to rely on that over time.
Yeah, and
Um,
I would say for us, our relationships with our vendors are just as important as our customers, because they're the ones that are helping us dictate our pricing and our lead times. And I find that the better relationship you have with your vendor, when you do need to push them because something is urgent, there was mistakes previously or whatever, they will bend over backwards to help you out in a time of need versus just being a shop that sends POs blindly.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I want to use the next point to kind of pivot us into the next topic.
Yep,
Integrate all processes with appropriate lead times to avoid surprises. And that's kind of key. You know,
absolutely.
the way that you integrate and build your process, that can again, it kind of really leads us into this next topic, which is it pays to sweat the details, right?
Mhm.
All the
Mhm.
processes that you do need to be accounted for in some way or another. The steps that you include in that process. If you want to talk a little bit about how you're developing this, what you've done using template or otherwise to make sure that nothing gets lost, right? That's kind of the
Yeah.
goal.
So this is more of our internal focus, right? Like focusing on the things we handle inside. And that's where when you look at our work orders inside ProShop, there's like 6 steps before you get to manufacturing. Like we have our manufacturing planning step, like that's an actual step on the work order. We have programming and quality checks, both inside quality for CMM programming, outside for part programming. Those are line items on every work order that help us build that calendar and that timeline out. Um, Custom steps for certain vendors or customers. We have customers that require material to be ultrasonic inspected. And so we have a custom template for that customer. Every time we get a new part for them, we just apply this template and it automatically adds like 3 steps to our routers where we're sending material out for ultrasonic inspection. We're receiving that material. We're doing our cert checks. And of course, these are all things that we evolve into by making mistakes. But again, it's
Right.
important when you do make a mistake and you do have to freak out and go to a vendor and ask for them to expedite something, or go to a customer and say, hey, we're going to be late. We need more time. Those are opportunities to improve the system and put steps in place to prevent that from happening again in the future. And it's only going to make you more accurate going down the road.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's really, really true on a number of levels. I mean, I think that if you've worked in the industry, you know what it's like to wrap up a hasty project and be like, "Good grief, I never want to do that again." And then the next step forward, you completely forget about it and you move on to the next thing, and then boom, 3 weeks later, 4 weeks later, you're doing exactly the same thing. And that's where having this feedback loop, building a template to say, "Okay, we know what the problem was. We scrambled through it. We know how to fix it. So the next time we get something with this requirement, all we have to do is pull this down." I'm a huge proponent of making things easy for people. If you have a process that you can document and then overlay that, copy it over, use it as a template for the next project, that makes not only a quick work of documenting things and making sure you don't miss anything, but also makes that person's job easier because they don't have to reinvent the wheel, so to speak, when it comes to that. So I think, the bullet point here of templates are a must. We're talking about that in parts and estimates, but there are so many ways to think about generating repetitive work and function into a way that you can just insert it into where it needs to go, whether it's a process plan or an overall company workflow, whatever that is. Find ways to do that in an effective way so you're addressing all those issues and again making it easier for the people that are filling those particular roles. One of the things that you had mentioned the other day when we were chatting was a work stoppage for verifying
Yeah.
material search. You want to kind of dive into that just a little bit and explain kind of what that is?
Yeah, and it was that ultrasonic kind of step I mentioned earlier. It was, we had missed this on our traveler that material needed to be ultrasonic inspected. And what actually caught us is our material vendor said, "Oh, all 7,000 plate will come to you ultrasonic inspected." So we just kind of took that as a, hey, we just order it from the vendor and it comes ultrasonic inspected. Well, we ordered a very thin piece of aluminum under a 1/4 inch. Well, there was a caveat that we didn't know that under 1/2 inch or something like that does not come ultrasonic inspected. So we pushed through the entire order, made the parts, sent them to plating. We're on our final inspection stage, and my quality guy was like, "Hey, I don't see an ultrasonic inspection cert anywhere here." And so, we're at the 11th hour, a day or two before shipping, and now we realize we have this problem. And thankfully, our customer was able to work with us and said, "Hey, we can accept these parts if you get them ultrasonic inspected in their completed state now." And so we were able to implement that workaround. But what that created for us was that work stoppage. So now we have those custom steps for this customer that right after we receive material, which is a line item on every work order, it's check for ultrasonic inspection cert on everything. And there's a big note: do not proceed past this step until it's completed.
Yeah. I love this example because it's really it really highlights that a lot of the people in their process, they build in the check, but they build it into the wrong spot. In your case, it
Yeah.
was built in at the end, final inspection.
Yeah.
You did catch it before it goes to the customer, which is definitely good. You don't want to send it to the customer and have them find it. But you realized right away, hey, this isn't, we checked this, but we checked it in the wrong spot. So you took action, you corrected the problem, the immediate issue, working with your customer to come to a resolution, and then you addressed your process. And if we can look at that a little bit more, how long do you think you actually invested in coming up with a better process? Was it, did you guys meet for hours and hours? How quick were you able to sort of revamp what you were doing?
I honestly don't think I even met with the team. I just made the change in ProShop, and then said, "Hey, for this customer, we add these steps no matter what." So this literally was probably a 5 minute fix where I went to our operation configuration table inside ProShop and I added a new line item, and then I trained my order entry person that anytime this customer shows up, we add these couple steps, and you just click the box and they're there.
Yep, yep. Yeah, and like I said, I think it's really key to being able to template that out. And I love that, 5 minutes and a little bit of extra training. And that's really what sweating the details can be. You don't have to spend enormous amounts of time running
Yeah.
MRB and then having weekly or monthly meetings with the whole team and then coming up with a big outline and then trying to decide how to incorporate that into your process. You can do it in small bite-sized bits. And that's probably the most effective way to do it overall, because we all know, when you're faced with climbing a mountain, you look at the mountain and you think, geez, how am I ever going to get over it? But if you just look at the first 10 feet in front of you, you just do it 10 feet at a time, and that's it.
Yep.
And so
Yep.
you can really accomplish quite a lot if we think about that mindset and kind of move that forward.
Yeah.
Um,
And the point you made about putting the check in the right spot, that is so crucial because even after we fixed this problem the first time, where okay, now we put the check material cert operation up when we received the material, we actually found that we were still having a secondary issue where the work order was configured properly, but what we were noticing is that our receiving individual, when they received the material, they were going to the vendor PO and receiving the material and checking it off and doing everything that we asked them to do. But we were still having issues on this because they were not going back to the work order to see if there were any additional material steps. So what was happening, we would receive the material in-house, they would check off the PO, and then it was my machinist who was finding that ultrasonic inspection wasn't being done because he saw the work stoppage. So we did some additional training. And now our receiving individual is checking every single work order to see if there's additional material steps that need to be done. That way, material doesn't sit on our floor for a week before we get it to ultrasonic and it's the machinist telling us the problem. Now our receiving team is the one finding that problem.
yeah, yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, find the problem in the right spot. All right, just watching the time. Let's
Yep.
move on to the next topic here. Hidden bottlenecks. They kill throughput. There's so many things that factor into this. External processes. We're going to start there. Outside processing. We've already talked about outside processing with some good examples here. But why would we want them to be longer than or sorry, why would you always want to quote longer lead times than what's promised? What's your
Sure.
reasoning there?
So this is the constant, like just as we sometimes will quote a standard lead time to our customer, outside processing, plating houses, heat treat, they all have that 7 to 10 day window or 10 to 15 day window that they quote you. But how many times do they actually hit that, right? Like, I mean, we use a plating shop locally for a lot of our easy anodized parts, and they're 7 to 10 days. But I'll be damned if it's not 10 to 15 days on regular POs that we don't expedite. So we took that matter in our own hands, and in our quoting process, we automatically just put 15 days for a local plating. California, we're putting 20 days. And that
Yeah,
sounds crazy, but they're quoting us 12 days in-house, and then when you factor in 5 to 7 days shipping back and forth, you're really close to that 20-day mark. And that by having a couple extra days cushion, that just gives you a little bit more time in case UPS doesn't pick up the package the day they say they, right? If UPS doesn't show up or they forget the package or your own team doesn't get it to the bench at 3 o'clock when the cutoff is, you just lost a whole day. So it's just be conservative on lead times, and that will give you the power down the road to tell your customer, I guarantee you it will be on your dock by this date, and this is why you need to pay me the price I'm telling you.
right, right. Yeah, and do your customers do they have very narrow on-time windows, or can you deliver fairly early in most cases?
Honestly, I don't have any customers that care if I deliver early.
Yeah. Mhm.
There's one customer that in their documents it says I have to get approval outside 5 days, but I've had many times where the buyer has verbally told me send it when it's done. It's like a process that they have, but in reality they want it as soon as possible. So we always now we always are usually shipping early and customers love us for that. And that's again what gives us that power to kind of demand a premium price because we're always delivering early or on time at worst.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And part of knowing this is measuring it, both
Yep.
for your suppliers and vendors, and also what you do for your customers. So if you are not, and, speaking to the audience, if you're not yet measuring those things, we strongly encourage that you find a way to start because if you can measure it, you can affect it, as the saying goes. And knowing on average, you have vendor A and you send them anodizing, and you have vendor B and you send them anodizing. If you can measure that over time and see on-time delivery, among other things, quality, non-conformances, that kind of stuff. If you can do all of those things, then you can decide who your best option is and choose that option when timeline is critical. Same thing for your deliveries to your customer. If you're measuring it and you find that you're constantly 1 day late or 5 days late, then you know what you need to work on and maybe what areas and specifically what customers or kinds of projects could benefit from that.
Yep.
Um, the next bullet point here is, don't let customers push into unrealistic lead times. Now, we all know that customers are going to ask for everything that they want, including really, really unreasonable lead times. Um, and sometimes they really need it and sometimes they don't. Um, as people that quote these projects or these packages, we really do tend to want to give the customer exactly what they want, but overall that doesn't really help them. It doesn't help us make money, and this goes back to kind of building that really solid relationship. Telling the truth, sticking to what we said we're going to do, and then running that through the gamut. Proactive planning prevents overnight and rush charges,
Yep.
all that kind of stuff. It all kind of factors into play. Do you think that you got a lot of sort of pushback from your customers as you started moving to a more realistic lead times in your quotes, or do you think that you had a pretty good time of getting them to accept that and they were understanding?
Well, I think it's kind of twofold, right? Like when we didn't have a lot of data or reputation to lean on, we were constantly being beat up, and it's like I need this in 4 weeks. I need this in 4 weeks, and when you're getting new into an industry or a customer, you're kind of your instinct is to give them what they want, and you sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. But one of the things that we found is really helpful is quote your accurate kind of no extra cost lead time, and then hit them with the heavy expedite fee for that four. Let's say you're quoting 8 weeks and they want it in four. Well, now you need to make this part 100% under overtime. So your part cost has gone up 50% just in
Mm-hmm.
labor time. And if you're going to overnight ship to plating and overnight ship back, right? Maybe you weren't factoring in shipping charges at all, and now you've got $200 to $500 extra just in shipping. If you're going to expedite it to plater, now you've doubled your lot charge at a minimum, maybe more. So it's not unrealistic for us for the expedite fee to be more than the entire order if it were on a standard lead time, and be prepared to detail what those costs are, and they quickly understand that, oh wow, this is why it's 8 weeks, and if it's four, I really understand why the expedite charge is, $4,000 or something like that. And then they can make the decision. There's a lot of companies out there where time trumps cost all the time, and they'll be willing to pay for that $4,000 expedite. And we've made a ton of money off that. But you just need to be able to paint both pictures to them and explain in detail why it is this way.
Right. Yeah. 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 I think that's again, setting those realistic expectations, making sure that you're telling the truth. It doesn't do anybody any good to promise something you can't do.
Yep.
And it certainly doesn't do you any good to promise something you can't afford to do, right? So,
Yeah. Yeah, and
it,
don't be afraid to say no. If the lead time is really unrealistic, if they want this crazy part in 1 week and it's going to take a week to get material, you've got to do all these outside processing steps, machine it, make it. I mean, tell them no. Like if they're hell bent on getting that part in a week, let somebody else step on that landmine and be the shop that fails. Don't put yourself in that scenario where they're gonna remember that in their head and be like, "Oh, I sent this part to this shop and they were 3 weeks late." Don't put yourself in that scenario.
Yeah, yeah. A couple of other, key things here on this topic for hidden bottlenecks. This isn't just things that happen externally when you're relying on another vendor. This could be things that happen internally. So, let's say that you've got a CMM or a ferro arm or something like that is, an advanced inspection piece of equipment, and the project requires that. Well, if you don't understand the backlog or the workload of things that have to move through your CMM, and you quote the job with understanding your programming lead times, your machine lead times, and even your vendor lead times, but you forget that you've got a massive backlog on the CMM and it's going to take an extra 3 days to get through. Well, that's a really good example of a hidden bottleneck that you didn't account for in your system. So again, thinking about what are all the things that have to happen? Do I need to buffer in extra time for these? Or these particular steps in the process, and can I get it inspected and get it out to the customer in a reasonable way? A lot of those things, by the way, when we think about bottlenecks, those are really really good selections for improvement process. So what I mean by that is if we say that I'll continue to use the CMM as an example. If we say that the CMM takes an average of 3 days to get a project through, and we understand that most projects actually only need to run through the CMM for say 2 or 3 hours, then we can start evaluating and say, well, does it make sense to invest in a secondary machine? Do we add in a CMM functionality on the night shift and train somebody on the night shift to come in and operate the CMM in sort of off hours, if you will, or is there some other solution? But again, this goes back to measuring it. If you know these things, then you can try to take action and reduce those bottlenecks. So those aren't the things that slow things down. You can get better lead times for your customer and still do it within your budget.
Yep.
We don't want to see anyone go out and buy a CMM, a second CMM or something, and then not really understand whether or not they have the work for it. I think most people kind of understand
Yep.
that at a base level, but again, that's being able to measure things to sort of prove it and then build out ROIs, etc.
And that's where, like on our previous slide, sweat the details. Again, that's where having all these steps on your router with appropriate lead times, even internal lead times. We have an internal lead time for our quality department, and it's
Mhm.
2 days. So anytime we have an inspection line item, it automatically builds in a 2 day buffer onto our schedule. And thankfully, we are efficient enough to where we constantly beat that. But that's where we pick up a day in our lead time, right? If we
Yeah.
if we plan for 2 days in inspection and it really only takes 4 hours of one day, well, now we've just gained a day and a half on our lead time that we could use somewhere else or deliver early to the customer.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think that's great. Yeah, and I actually in my scheduling, when I do the product demonstrations, I actually have a scale that I use, a multiplier that I can adjust. If I schedule a resource for 40 hours a week, a full shift, but I realize my throughput is actually only more like 30 hours, then I just go ahead and adjust
Yeah.
my efficiency metric to scale that schedule, and then I can see everything based on whatever it is there. So there's a lot of ways to do that. Good segue into on-time delivery. How it's not just a metric; it's actually part of your reputation. Um, I'll let you talk a little bit about what your on-time delivery is and what that
Yeah.
means for focused on machining.
So again, we're currently at. I look back the past 8 months, and we're plus 95% every month for the past 8 months. And if I look back farther than that, it's probably that same level. But then again, this is part of our evolution, right? When we first implemented ProShop, we had no system of tracking really on-time delivery. We even really didn't have a schedule. So when we actually started tracking it, our numbers were in the averaging 45, 50%, where I think a lot of shops are that aren't monitoring this actively. And it's not a negative hit on the shop. It's just that's the reality of where things are if you don't track every little detail. There's far too many details in the manufacturing process for people to successfully do it time and time again without a tool to help. And so yeah, we're consistently 96.5%, 97.6% at the time we built this. And also 100% quality rating, right? Like in my example that we gave about the ultrasonic material, we had the checks in the right spot, even though, we didn't catch that ultrasonic until the very end, we did catch it. And
Hmm.
so because we caught it, we found it, we worked with a solution with the customer, we delivered quality parts to them, right? So it didn't ding our quality rating because we had the process in place. We did all the things they asked for. We delivered parts to 100% quality, even though that did ding the on-time delivery because we lost a week there for the ultrasonic. But the those two things going hand in hand, high on-time delivery and a very high, if not 100% quality rating, you will please many customers and you will continue to get work and also get the pricing you should get from your customers.
Yeah. And speaking of the reputation part of it, this is, I mean, it's a vast industry, but it's also a small industry, right?
Yeah.
Your name is known. People,
Yeah.
buyers, they move around, they talk with other buyers. Your name is known by your competitors very often. And if you've got everything dialed in and you're consistently giving the customer exactly what they want, that reputation follows your name, and that's pretty huge in our industry for, again, like you said, continuing to win more work, winning good projects, and not just winning projects, but winning the right ones, right?
Yeah.
The ones that you want to do, that you're going to be good at, that you've got an edge on, and of course that you can make money on, right? That's better for the company overall.
Yeah,
Um,
and that's been a big change for us in the past couple years is, we always did a good job pleasing the customers, but we were price takers at some aspect, I mean, as we were new to the AS 9100 world and we were new to aerospace, we really leveraged kind of price as our foot in the door. And so even though we were growing, it was always a struggle with, is this the right part? Did we make money on it? Did we make as much money as we should have? And it was kind of more of a long-term change than I wanted it to be. But now that we're achieving these on-time delivery rates and these quality metrics, now I can demand the prices that we should be asking our customers. And they also have the confidence to go back to their manager and say, hey, I know Focused on Machining is 5% higher here, but they've never let us down. I really think we should give them the 5% versus going with an unknown entity and risk having a late or a quality problem.
Yeah, 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 and it's just like your vendors. Building these relationships, it takes time. Building your reputation, it takes time, but it does
Yep.
happen, and it does make a difference. Overall. Speaking with honesty as well, right? I mean, your clients respect the fact that you tell them what the expectations are. You're upfront. You review the contract at the beginning and make sure that everything is, as you go to confirm that order, everything is understood and in line. That helps you internally process things correctly, and also your client knows if you take objection to anything, they're going to hear about it right away. It's not going to be something that filters in as you go to ship the parts and, oh yeah, by the way, we didn't do this because we had this issue. It's all done, at front. And that honesty makes sure that the client is, again, they're going to get what they actually need.
Right.
Um, and that's, some of that customer trust that we often talk about. Um, the visibility into schedule is another really, I think, important topic here. Um, this one kind of hits close to home for me. If you know me, you know I've done scheduling for better than a decade in our company, uh, and as a scheduler, being able to have the visibility to know which projects are on time and what's at risk is pretty huge. Uh, in the position of scheduling or in project management, we often find ourselves in the position of having to share bad news.
Right.
And when we look at a schedule and we see that there's an issue, we can quickly dive into it, understand what the issue is, and hopefully take action to resolve it. If we can't, we need to be able to go back to our customer and go back to the buyer and say, look, I'm sorry, this this is not a good situation, but this is what it looks like. We're going to be 3 days late. We're going to be a week late or whatever it is. And I had a boss once tell me, I'm in a position to share the bad news, but you want to share the bad news early because nobody wants to hear it. Nobody wants to give it. But the earlier you do that, the more likely it is that everyone can work on a solution, whether that's expediting things, splitting orders out, getting in and offloading some work to make extra room, whatever it is. Again, the idea is that the earlier you see this, the more visibility you have into these things can have huge rippling impact through the rest of the system and then to how you actually service the customer. Because even though you have very good delivery numbers and quality numbers with your customers, sometimes things don't work out, uh, and they definitely appreciate, even if it's a tough conversation, they definitely appreciate knowing that sooner rather than later.
Yeah, yeah. So, kind of like building on the slides we've done previously, like all the things we've talked about, they all correlate with one another, right? Like if you're not sweating the details and you're not putting every little step into your travelers and you're not accounting for all the times and shipping and inspection and internal times, then your schedule isn't true and accurate. So then you really don't have the full visibility, and that's how you kind of get into that scenario where you're not able to really look far ahead and predict and communicate with customers. And then you're kind of more reactive. And by the time you realize that no, we are going to be late, you're really towards the end and aren't giving your customers that much notification. And I'll tell you that 96.6% on-time delivery, it doesn't mean that we don't ever tell a customer, hey, it looks like we're going to be late. Can we get more time? We do that fairly frequently. I'd say, maybe 20% of our work orders, we have to reach out to a customer and say, hey, it looks like we're going to be about 3 days late on this job. Is that okay? Can we change the date? And 9 times out of 10, yeah, they say no problem. They update the PO, they send it to us, we update the date in our system, and then that's how we achieve that high rate. If they come back and say, no, this actually does not work. We absolutely need it on this date. Well, now we know that this job is a higher priority than other jobs, and then we need to move things around and really focus on getting this one on time.
Mhm.
Instead of everything is always urgent. Now we know just the couple that are urgent, and we're able to focus on those times and make sure we are not late on those jobs.
Yeah, yeah. I remember in my early career as a machinist, I worked for a company. We had, the typical paper package, the paper folders. Everything on the front of the folder was the customer name, the part number, and oftentimes a quantity, and then below that would be the due date. But
Yeah.
they didn't actually write dates on there. They wrote hot, 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 hot,
Yeah.
hot, or
Right.
AOG. And the on the shop floor, the only one that anyone ever cared about was AOG because everything
Right.
else didn't matter. And as a shop employee, that's really, really not where you want to be, right? You want to make sure that you're focusing on the important stuff, the stuff that actually does need to get done, AOG or otherwise. And if you just have this sort of ambiguous notation system of what to work on and how to prioritize things, that doesn't help anybody in the company figure out whether or not they're working on the right stuff. And again, I can tell you from personal experience, you think you're working on the right stuff, and then somebody comes down from the office and says, "What are you doing? This is completely wrong. Tear down the machine and move on to something else." Well, that doesn't make a good day for anyone. That's
Yeah.
that's not how we want to spend our time when we're setting up a machine or making parts.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
the must leave by date that's in Pro Shop is our gospel, right? Like my all my machinists, quality, all of them only know the must leave by. I don't even know if my employees, most of them would know where to find the actual customer due date. And I'm totally fine with that because it's irrelevant from most shop employees, right? Like they don't need to know that this part's going to go outside process at two different places and spend 5 weeks at outside process. They need to know in order for all that to happen, this part has to leave this shop on this date. That's the due date for them. And so we really live and die by that must leave by date. And also that's, going back again on a couple other slides. That's why having those lead times on your outside processing steps, having the ship to and from days accurate, that's what makes that must leave by date so accurate. And there's been many times where my employees will come and say, "Hey, we're going to be, we're not going to get this part out by the must leave by date. What should they just call the due date? We're not going to get this out by the due date." And then I'll go and look and be like, "Okay, we've got 20 days planned for outside processing. Probably not going to take 20. We're okay. Continue on your path. We'll ship it, 2 or 3 days late, and then we'll work with either shipping UPS or the outside processing vendor to make up those 3 days."
yeah, yeah. And then you can also make changes on the fly, right? If you have to add an
Yes.
expedite fee, you just go right into the order and add it. And you're not messing up any job history. You're not messing up anyone else's plan. You've got that sort of customized. Again, paying attention to the time here, we've got, sort of our last bullet point topic here, which is continuous customer experience, right? A lot of this is generated from workflow improvements. And really, this is about understanding your system, understanding your process, and running that process and measuring it over time and making improvements. You said the other day that managing everything that you manage, it wouldn't be possible without a robust system. You want to kind of dive into that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, again, these are all kind of topics we've touched on already, but like the manufacturing process from order entry to shipping customers part is not a simple process, right? I have a family member that works in distribution with a plastic company, and like their set of tasks is so small compared to what we have to do as machine shops. They order material, put it on the shelf, put a markup on it, ship it out the door. Like they really don't do a lot. But in manufacturing, in machining, there are a plethora of things that happen from raw material to finished product. And for any one person or group of people to try to manage that and deal with it without a detailed step, that being the work order that really takes all of those steps and lays them out. It's almost impossible to do. It really is. I mean, I say almost impossible because I know, we were a shop without Pro Shop one day and we did it. We managed it, but it was at the expense of everybody's sanity and everybody's stress levels, right? Like that's where that's where a non-robust system, succeeds is you really have to have people that make the gears turn and make the system go around. But when you flip that on its head and you put all the pressure on the system and you build the system to take the pressure off the people, well, now the people get to do their jobs in a much stress-free environment. And now they don't have to constantly be kind of that hero that always saves the day. They just have to go through the flows of their work each day. And when an issue arrives, now you can really call on everybody, all hands on deck, and really get that problem solved instead of, everything kind of, like you said, everything being hot all the time.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think obviously there's a number of ways to do this. Having a really interconnected system makes a huge difference, of course.
Yep.
Having systems that allow you to measure them, like we said before, that makes a really, really big difference. Um, one of the things that we didn't really talk about this, but I was thinking about it earlier is that continuous improvement, right, or workflow improvements overall, they kind of involve everyone, right? It's
Yeah.
not just the people in the office, it's not just project managers, it's not purchasing agents and customer service people, but getting down onto the shop floor, pounding the pavement, so to speak, you'll find that a lot of people have a lot of really good ideas about what they do every day. So opening up the door, listening to what's going on a daily basis. Most of the people that run machine shops that I talk to do this anyway, but it is worth mentioning that there's so much value in that because you can take that, turn it around, and make positive change for the entire process, and that's going to benefit not just the jobs that you work on, not just your employees, but it's going to benefit your customers as well. And hopefully that all trickles down to the bottom line. Of course, that's a huge part of our goal here. Um, a robust system can look like a lot of different things. So as Pro Shop, we focus on ERP work. That you need all that visibility. A robust system could mean that it's your fixturing for your machines, right? Like if your setups are constantly taking 2 to 3 hours longer than you think they should, maybe you should take a look at some different fixturing systems or tooling systems or something like that. We have in this industry, as you know, systems upon systems upon systems, right? So
Yeah.
you can just continue to peel back the layers and keep going, and that again goes back to the idea you can do small bite-sized improvements when you find something, and it doesn't have to be this massive thing where you take a week off and revamp everything. It can just be part of what you do on a daily or weekly basis, and then over time, all those things end up adding up to quite a lot of savings and quite a lot of improvements. Um,
Yeah, for us, continuous improvement is not a formal process. Like we don't have a suggestion box. We don't have a meeting. We don't do any of those things. What continuous improvement looks like for us is like myself specifically as the president, I am looking for areas in the shop or things that cause people stress and heartache, right? When an employee comes to me and says, "I'm so frustrated because this is always happening." Well, right there's a problem. Why is the process broken, or why is it putting so much angst on this one person that it's causing them to come to me with a stressful situation? That's how we do continuous improvement, is we solve those issues and we build them into the process and we put steps in place to keep things from sitting around and until they blow up, right? That's how we handle continuous improvement. And then the alternative to that is, once you get a lot of those figured out, well, then they stop coming to you because they're not stressed. But then you'll start to see other areas where it's like, oh, we could have done a little bit better here. Like what took so long, like you mentioned, changing over from this job to this job. Well, I had to change this vise out, and that vise weighs 80 pounds and it's from the 1950s and it's not
yeah,
true anymore. You know what I mean? Like then
yeah,
you start to uncover, okay, it's not super stressful, but it still costs you a couple hours. And then you can realize, oh, it's the equipment or whatever it is, whatever you can start to dive into to things that aren't so apparent,
mhm,
just by asking employees like, hey, what really caused the slowdown here? How could we improve this? Or just have them explain to you why it took the time it took, and not in an aggressive manner, right? Like you're not trying to attack and say, why aren't you better? Why aren't you faster at your job? Just say, why did this take 2 hours? Please help me understand. And if it takes 2 hours, it takes 2 hours. But if there's something we can do, if we can purchase a new vise that isn't so heavy and is true and save 2 hours every time they use it, well, that's a worth a while investment to make.
yeah, yeah, and all of these things, as you make any improvements in your workflows, it all adds up to better customer experience. To kind of loop back around to that theme of saying, hey, how can I make sure my customer is getting what they need? When they need it, at the price they need, and at the quality they're paying for. All of those things they factor in. It's one sort of harmonious machine built out of all these subsystems, and then of course driven by the people that we employ to do these things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, All right, so we've got about 5 minutes left. It looks like we have one question. If anyone else has any questions that they'd like to ask, again, please shoot them over into the Q&A box. But let's just start with the one that we have. I think the name is wrong. I think it was someone named John. Asked Justin, how long have you been using ProShop, and did you use a different system prior? I don't know if you want to spend a few minutes chatting about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So we technically purchased ProShop mid 2019, and then I myself did the implementation. Told myself, "Oh, we'll be up and running in 2 months," and then I was the bottleneck, just as I think most owners are, right? They're just too many tasks. So it took me all the way till the end of 2019 to do the full implementation. And so we went live January 1, 2020 is when we went live day one with ProShop. And we haven't looked back since. We did a hard cutoff. We let the work orders that were already in place be there, but from that day on, we did not look back. And we were using E2 before. It was a good system. It did what we needed to at the time. But again, we wanted to kind of move into aerospace work. We wanted AS9100. And I just knew that that system wasn't right for all of those things. So we jumped in with ProShop, but it's been an evolution since, right? Like we continue to make updates to ProShop. We continue to learn from the ProShop community, right? I mean, I have a daily task where I go out and check the ProShop forum. And I'm mostly answering questions, but there are times when I send questions out. When I say, hey, what's the best workflow for this, or is there a function of this? I'm constantly trying to keep up to speed with new updates of ProShop so we can become better and make our system better as well.
Yeah, I think forums are a great place to do that. Industry industry connections like NTMA, right? They have a
Mhm.
forum. Lots of really good places to pose questions to the greater industry, talk to people around the world, and just get really great ideas. I think keeping that open is a really sort of great thing. I will also mention that the training that we do now, as a company, we're constantly evolving, even as a software company, and constantly not just evolving the software, but evolving how we do things. And the way that we do training now, Justin, you wouldn't recognize it. It's improved, just uh, time over time. And
Yeah.
the way that we do that now, I won't spend a lot of time on that. But if anyone's interested, reach out to us. We can kind of explain what the ProShop onboarding looks like and the ProShop training functions that we do. We got another one here from Michael. Justin, you mentioned something in ProShop called a work stoppage. What is that and how does it work? Does it keep a shop employee from moving past an operation before the issue is resolved, and how does that work? I know I just threw a lot of questions at you, but we'll start with that.
Yeah,
What
no.
do you mean
So
by a work stoppage?
for us, it's actually really simple. It sounds way cooler than it actually is. We have a line item on our traveler right after material inspection. This is for the ultrasonic material inspection, and it literally says check ultrasonic inspection certs. Do not proceed past this step until it's completed. And those are in bold. So every work order that has this step, it's just has that language right there. And no, it does not prevent employees from moving past the operation. They can continue, they can do whatever they want. But it gives us an opportunity if that does happen to say, hey, this line specifically says do not do anything until this is checked off. It is not checked off. You are now setting up your machine, right? And so it gives us an opportunity to really drive that point home when people don't follow it. But we've really only had to train on that once and maybe correct a couple people, and it's become kind of gospel here. So we just create a line item on our work order and we just verbally say do not move past until this is done. Brian, I don't know. Is there another kind of forceful way of doing it in Pro Shop?
No, and that's because in general, we all know that if you hit a roadblock, right, some things could still be done, and some things can't. So, as a general rule in the software, we try not to block people from actually doing things. There are a few things that do that for sure, but if if you know that you can go ahead and create an inspection plan while the material certification is being sorted out, we're not going to prevent somebody from doing that because the two aren't mutually exclusive. So
Yep.
again, there's a lot of nuance that goes into that. But the other thing that really makes this actually very, very effective, even though we don't have a hard stop, is that um, it's one system. Everybody's working on the same system. If you update something on a customer PO, that can flow down to the work order, that flows down to the shop floor. Everybody sees it. You don't have to chase folders around. You don't have to run around and tell people. It's all there. Plus, the system is tracking who is changing what. So if somebody deleted a note, you can go back and figure out what was going on with that, right? There's an audit path to know all that stuff. Again, being one connected system really makes a lot of that viable and fairly easy to do.
It's interesting you mentioned that last piece because we use that functionality a lot. And in fact, there's kind of a joke in the shop, where I set up a lot of data because I'm on the front end, right? Like I create the part numbers and it's myself and my office manager, we share that duty. But there's kind of a joke in the shop where people will hover over and if it's got my name attached to it, they kind of take that with a grain of salt.
Yeah,
And I welcome it, right? Because
yeah,
I don't want to be the holder up of all the processes. So I
right.
kind of welcome that. But yeah, especially when we're looking at estimates, right? Like if it's the second time we've made a part and we go back to the part level and my time I originally entered is still the time,
Hmm.
well, we kind of know that that's not really the time, and we need to go talk to the machinists and figure out what the real time is.
Right.
But they're really good about updating those times on the certified to run now, so my name is not on a lot of them anymore.
That's great. Yeah. All right. So I realize we're just a bit over time. I want to thank everyone for joining. We do appreciate the questions that we got. Of course, if you have a question for either us at ProShop or Justin at Focused on Machining, here's our contact info. You can take a screenshot or even just reach out through our websites. We're more than happy to chat with anyone that needs it. And whatever you do, try to improve your process. Try to make sure that your customers are getting what they need, and keep looking up because it's an ever evolving industry. But thanks again. Have a great rest of your day, and hopefully we can chat with you guys sometime soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Justin.